Awesome. Well, again, yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, Amani. I have quite the slide deck for you all today. I'm going to try to get somewhat deep on some issues here, but also kind of stay at a high level since grid equity in its intersection with technical components of grid regulation gets really, really complicated really, really quick. Yeah, but today we're again talking about advancing grid equity and in particular cultivating community power and regulatory advocacy. Again, my name is Shay Banton. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a regulatory program engineer and energy justice policy advocate with the Interstate Renewable Energy Council. Few notes today, some ground rules. If you do have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat for me, and I'll get to them throughout the conversation. I definitely want this to be a little interactive since we have a smaller audience today. So if something comes up that I really want to address, I'll try to address it in time. If not, I'll wait to the end. Also, please note that our organization does not allow for AI note takers. So if you do have one trying to get into the chat room, we might end up removing it. But we will be providing, slidings and recordings and additional resources, as well as notes about additional IREC resources coming out in the near future. So, brief overview of the Interstate Renewable Energy Council. Our objective as a organization, a 501(c)(3) organization, is that we build the foundation for the rapid adoption of clean energy efficiency to benefit people, the economy, and our planet. We do this through three main objective areas. The first is workforce development, where we create pipelines between clean energy jobs and local community members that are looking for potential career opportunities in the solar industry. We also then have a local clean energy solutions team or local initiatives, which really focuses on empowering local governments and communities in the development of their policies that enable clean energy development in their regions. And finally, we have the regulatory team, which is what I am a part of. Regulatory team is really focused on helping U.S. states and territories regulate their electric utilities, ensuring that distributed energy resources can rapidly and equitably decarbonize the grid. We have several different initiatives here, but our team is largely made up of legal experts, consultants, and engineering experts that really understand the regulatory process. Many of them are past utility engineers or have worked in utility landscape for many, many decades. And we focus on really intervening in regulatory proceedings across the country, trying to advocate for policies that benefit clean energy deployment. So, with that background, let's get into the meat and potatoes. So, today, again, we are talking about grid equity, and we're going to talk through a few different items here. So, first is the why of grid equity. Why does it even matter? Then we'll really describe like what exactly is grid equity from definitions that have been proposed from other organizations as well as IREC's own. And then we'll talk about how to advocate for grid equity, a framework we developed in previous proceedings and efforts, from defining your own objectives as an organization, as well as identifying areas for potential engagement and intervention as a community group. Then we'll talk about where certain grid inequities are currently known, providing a quick overview of some of the existing research efforts that have been ongoing in the space, and areas for future growth. And finally, go over through some to-do lists, what things you can do in the near term to really kickstart your journey in enabling grid equity for your own communities. So, why grid equity matters? Well, we know that the grid wasn't really built for everyone. It wasn't really built with people in mind. It was built for I guess, for the electrification of the community, but also for, unfortunately, ensuring certain profit motivations are maintained and to ensure the financial viability of grid infrastructure and capital build out. And so, as we recognize now in the transformation and undergoing under climate change and energy transition that we're hoping to still be pushing forward, that this big transformation needs to be guided in the right way to ensure that no one will be left out this time, as people have been left out in the past. So we know that for nearly a century, there have been decisions regarding to the grid about where power has come from, how the grid was maintained, what neighborhoods received what particular investments, the quality of power provided, and what customer rights to maintain access to that power. And many of these decisions were made without direct community voices in the past. And what has this resulted in? It has resulted in many times wealth extraction from communities that aren't benefiting from power delivery, local power delivery. It's resulted in older and less reliable infrastructure in many of these communities, rampant energy insecurity and poverty across many marginalized groups in the United States, as well as lower access to clean energy for said communities. So we want to make sure that we recognize and highlight these harms, and that we repair them going forward in alignment with energy equity principles. And we also recognize that disparities are currently highly measurable, right? We've had several efforts, not anything as maybe cohesive or as widespread as we really need to really understand the depth of the issues across the nation. But there have been several efforts to, again, quantify these disparities from the kind of main issue area in grid equity conversations, which is utility involuntary disconnections, and the differences between certain racial and income groups that experience those disconnections at a higher rate, from to hidden energy poverty trends, so how people's behavior changes the way they use energy in order to avoid, again, utility shutoffs due to heightened bill cost, especially today with the heightened bills that we're seeing across the country, to power outages, either in just standard reliability events, maybe poor reliability in certain areas, especially in like very rural or often indigenous communities, or whether that happens in emergency events, as we've seen in like Hurricane Maria with the devastation that happened in Puerto Rico, or Texas Winter Storm Uri and the impacts on Black and Brown communities during that event. And then finally, we have clean energy access, which is a topic here that IREC really cares about. How does the existing grid infrastructure allow communities to adopt clean and resilient forms of clean energy? So now that we've kind of outlined the background of why we think or why we should be talking about grid equity and centering it in all of our conversations, let's go ahead and move into what is grid equity. So we know that the grid should serve everyone equitably, but how exactly does this occur? So the lingering definition, I think that's been most likely quoted by most entities, is from Vote Solar, who has definitely been leading the charge in a lot of these spaces. And it's very simple and beautiful in its sense. It's ensuring that the electric distribution grid serves all customers equitably. But IREC has kind of expanded this definition. We have a much broader one that is very, very technical, but in this space, I think this would be a little bit better. And that is that grid equity is the deliberate shaping of an electric grid that centers the communities it serves, especially those historically underserved or marginalized, and ensuring that they have reliable, affordable, and resilient access to clean energy ultimately. So let's place this in context of the just energy transition. This is a little example, a little like analogy that I've used previously that I'm sure several of you have heard from previous conversations. But if we think about the just energy transition as the mountaintop, right? Where do we ultimately want to go at the end of the day? Who do we want to serve? How do we want to enable a just transition for all? Everyone is brought forward, everyone is brought along in this transition. And then we can start thinking about as we think about that destination, we have to think about ways to get there. So first and foremost, we need something to point us in the right direction. And this is often referred to as the energy equity tenets or energy justice tenets. Those are distributional, recognitional, procedural, and reparative justice paradigms, kind of spearheaded by the of Energy Justice. And by abiding by and constantly reviewing in the context of those tenets, we're able to ensure that whatever step we take is going at least close to the right direction towards that final destination. But today's conversation, we want to know where we are in our transition to the just transition, how far it is, and what roadblocks we might run into along the way. And that's actually where we think about grid equity as our map. So again, noting where we've been, where we are, and the roadblocks. And so we'll talk a bit more about that as that goes. But finally, in the main purpose of like having that mapping tool, besides knowing what steps we need to take, is yeah, getting to the destination, and we need some tools to get there. So with the grid equity in context and with energy equity kind of leading from a compass standpoint, we can also then leverage several tools and develop policies and interventions or specific instruments to alleviate the burdens and provide necessary support to navigate around that map, take steps in the right direction with energy equity, and then finally reach that just transition goal. Perfect. So now that we've kind of given an overview of what grid equity ultimately is in the context of just transition, some past efforts to enable it, and some definitions, I think we can start talking about how we should actually be advocating for grid equity as a group. And so IREC has worked together with some organizations to develop a slight framework here. We tested this out in Maine, and we would love this to also be a tester for you all. So please feel free to give feedback and input as we go through. So we're going to be talking about three main components: a framework, some objective questions that can guide you in your investigation and grid equity efforts, and then finally some early intervention steps and procedures that you can take. So first and foremost, when it comes to a framework for grid equity, we've recognized a trend across three main areas that are the most beneficial to ensuring that you as a community organization, as well as the advocates that you're working with to help support you, as well as the decision makers in the process, all have the necessary tools to understand the issues and see the bottlenecks, see the burdens, see the barriers, and then alleviate them with the proper tools and mechanisms in place. And so these are first, data transparency, second, inclusive decision making, and third, investment prioritization. So data transparency is first, and I'll just read this off real quick. Grid data must be easily accessible, highly visible, and integrated with justice-centered metrics to ensure that decision-making authority is appropriately shared, derived from recognitional procedural tenets of energy equity. This is an area that IREC focuses a significant amount of time in. Data is a great enabler of action. It allows you to, again, from the mapping exercise, understand the current state of affairs and also track progress towards your long-term goals. And so without robust data transparency requirements, reporting requirements of utilities and commissions, you often cannot make the progress necessary towards that just transition goal. So that is an area that enables a lot of work across the advocacy space and something that we highly, highly focus on as an organization. I didn't highlight maybe some of the areas here on these slides, but topics of interest here in terms of data transparency are going to be for clean energy access, tools like host capacity maps are very useful. There's going to be, second to that, are going to be utility accountability measures and utility reporting. That's going to include robust Q reporting requirements provided by utilities or mandated by public utility commissions to basically track the progress of clean energy access or interconnection of clean energy resources. That's also going to then spread across to other areas of data transparency aside from clean energy access. So maybe that's utility disconnections, the rate of disconnections, and the location of those disconnections, so that advocates, as I'll talk about a little later, can actually map those to particular communities and understand where disparities exist. This also then relates to energy burden assessments and better understanding how energy burden affects certain communities as well as their behavior trends over time. Second framework or second important objective area under grid equity is inclusive decision making, right? So grid planning and investment must be accessible and inclusive of all affected communities, ensuring that the historically marginalized have a meaningful voice in shaping the future of the energy system, alignment with procedural recognitional justice of energy equity. This one obviously cannot highlight enough. I know this is something that we're all pretty much aware of, but one major component of the inclusive decision-making process is often that we think about it not only well too late of actually making meaningful progress and meaningful action. But we also don't focus on the enabling and capacity building efforts that make inclusive decision making actually possible. And so this is an area that I think maybe a few the other members on the call may also be focused on, but IREC is dedicating a lot of time to in the near future with several new initiatives focused on, again, increasing participatory access by lowering the knowledge thresholds and barriers in current regulatory processes. So we definitely want to make sure that when we think about inclusive, we think well before any decisions even close to being made to all the background necessary information that would be needed to make that space ultimately inclusive in the first place. And finally, the final objective is investment prioritization. So ensuring that investments into grid capital and utility services must be prioritized to address known disparities and enhance opportunities for previously underserved or disinvested populations in alignment with distributive and reparative justice paradigms. Um, Pretty clear here, but this is in alignment with, if we remember, in the not so distant past, the Justice 40 initiative, which really tried to focus in financial tools and incentives into promoting the investment into certain communities that need the support. And so we definitely want to make sure that any grid equity related proceeding or process or advocacy effort ensures that investment prioritization is part of the exercise itself. I will note that these three tenets do interplay with each other. So the easiest one here you can see, in order for investments to be prioritized to address known disparities, you have to know where the disparities are, right? And so that's clearly a nod to data transparency and the importance, foundational components of data transparency there. And then, as we talked about previously in inclusive decision making, there's a significant amount of understanding of current conditions that would then allow stakeholders to then enter into the decision-making space and convening space with informed and quantitative data to support their claims and the substantiate their issues that can then inform the investment prioritization down the line. So these are all tied together and are therefore all incredibly important. And if you fail any one of these particular objectives, you ultimately fail all of them. So now, as we move past the framework, again, the framework is to what you should really be thinking about or focusing on when you're considering engaging in or on grid equity related topics in the regulatory or legislative sphere. We think there are a few specific questions that can be really helpful as a community early on to start identifying where areas of need are in terms of capacity building, as well as identifying where disparities might be lingering at the current moment. So first is really qualification. So qualifying the community issues at the current moment. Um, so we recognize that, when it comes to advanced data analytics and all that it's going to be often that you're entering into a new space, a new utility territory, um, or arguing a new set of issues in front of a commission that isn't aware of the issues. And so there's first this qualitative component, really speaking at the grassroots level to the community groups and identify where the challenges are that then need to be investigated further through the greater intervention. So what issues are you facing? Are your community members facing challenges with frequent outages? So service quality, is that would be referred to? Or if we're thinking about in a resilient sense, are these outages occurring during major emergency days or storms? And there needs to be some talk or discussion about how to address those from a grid infrastructure investment or whatever it might be. Are the issues related to utility disconnections, right? Are we struggling or communities struggling with involuntary disconnections due to high energy burdens? And can we better suss out who these community members are and how we can provide support mechanisms to them? So that's a next task we have to do, which is great to understand. Is it just a lack of understanding of bills? That's been a huge challenge that has been identified by researchers over at Carnegie Mellon. Is it general affordability issues? Or in IREC's kind of focus area, is it clean energy access? Is our interconnection costs too high in a certain area? Or are there other certain financial or grid infrastructure barriers that are preventing certain communities from actually processing and developing their projects? And so that's something that IREC focuses on, and that if you can qualify that, you can then start looking into what are the root causes of those issues. And we also, of course, want to ensure that all voices are accounted for in alignment with the inclusive decision-making framework tenet. Second, focusing on what knowledge gaps we do have at the current moment, and this can help enable future investigatory efforts as you move forward. So first and foremost, like who are the utility companies that are currently, potentially the causers of these issues, and if not the causers, just are maybe just currently not aware of the issues that are currently being qualified to you and your communities, and ultimately who regulates them. So I don't have a lot of time here to really dive into the full regulatory process that will be coming hopefully in future trainings. But we have to really think about the differences in utility types. There are co-ops, there are municipals, and there are investor-owned utilities. And each of them are subject to maybe different rules. Some are subject to the Public Utility Commission, some aren't. And so how do we then engage with those entities to address the gaps and the issues that we've identified with our community members? Um, then we also have to really, if we are dealing with investor-owned utilities, which could probably be the majority of the time, then we have to think about who are the utility commissioners that we would need to be engaging with, and what are the procedures for intervening and voicing opinions in front of those commissioners. And that can include either direct communication with commissioners, which is likely not going to happen in most cases. There are these utility commissions typically have staff members that can be engaged with. And if not, then you can look at advocates like IREC or Volt Solar or other entities that would help support that effort. And so those are some of the knowledge gaps we identify that we know or don't know who they are. And we now have to think about what procedures we have to think about are available for intervening in those spaces. And third, we can start thinking then about who can help us identify, problem solve, and advocate in those spaces. So I hope to give you a glimpse of some of the entities that are working in this space. And I know a few of you on the call maybe are some of these entities, which is awesome. So you can please share information in the chat with each other. But yeah, what nonprofits, what research institutions, and what maybe government consumer protection agencies are available to support you in better understanding the scope of the challenges your communities are facing, and then framing that in a way that can best be perform in, I guess, the in argumentation with utility and the Public Utility Commission. So those expert groups, which we again hope to lower the participatory barriers over time so everyone can just participate effectively. But in the meantime, these groups are going to be your main source of support, giving you the necessary foundation and guidance to make the next steps, to take those next steps throughout the process. Now we can start thinking about areas of intervention. And so we discussed some of these already, but we can think about them all one by one. So first and foremost is obviously going to be the PUC, the Public Utility Commission. They are going to be your entity primarily focused on, or primary decision makers on grid planning, electricity rates, utility performance, and potentially utility accountability if it's baked into their rules. And if not, you could be the advocate pushing for that accountability. There are some things that I guess a lot of people don't know in this space. So one is the fact that there is a Public Utility Commission that dictates the rules for your utilities, but also who actually is on your Public Utility Commission board, or in your Public Utility Commission, and how are they ultimately elected. This has been kind of one of the major wins, I guess, in the grid equity space in the past couple years, with many grassroots organizations and advocacy space really pushing for areas where PUCs are elected by the public, and pushing and yeah, working and lobbying in those efforts to ensure that the public utility commissioners do address the needs of those community members, that people understand what they vote on, how much money they're responsible for, who they regulate, and why their vote is important. However, that's not always the case. A lot of public utility commissions are elected or nominated by their governors or by the state legislatures, but still recognizing and understanding who they are and their backgrounds is going to be very important as an advocate working in this space. And finally, yeah, what avenues they have for engagement, either directly or through staffers, whether that is available. Again, unfortunately, many utility commissions are not maybe as accessible as they could be. Some have done a really great job in this space, so I don't want to knock them, but others have made it pretty difficult or difficult to access them and provide feedback to. So we want to understand if that's a barrier, then you can start working towards other avenues of engagement. Um, so with public utility commissions being the primary stakeholder here, the next one is going to be kind of a precursor, and that is influencing or pushing for certain legislative directives. So this is meeting with state legislatures that can ultimately write the mandates in which utility commissions have to follow and adhere to. This can be very, very useful if done correctly, but if not done in a way that has specific enough and strong enough language, can result in not much change, unfortunately. So ensuring that you understand and know your state and local representatives, and that they understand your pain points, and maybe if there has been a history of PUC a lack of involvement or attention to the concerns that you have, then it's very important that you speak to your local and state representatives on that and how they should direct public utility commissions to really start taking seriously the voices and concerns of those community members. But a even better avenue for engagement that we've seen has definitely been the executive branch and the various agencies serving them. So whether it's the head office, the head governor's office, but likely if your state does have an energy office, environmental office, or consumer protections office, this is going to be one of your main points of entry. They have typically the ear of Public Utility Commission staffers, or may also be interveners inside of utility dockets themselves to advocate, hopefully on behalf of the public. And ultimately they are often going to be more accessible and open to meetings than the PUC, who just may be overburdened or may not have the staff capacity to handle that kind of intake. So highly recommend reaching out to those offices and understanding what agencies are in your state. And finally is the utility company. This is going to be, yeah, it's going to depend on a particular utility, but some utilities have been very, very open and excited to engage on a more in-depth level with their customers, especially when it comes to kind of larger or hopefully in some instances quantified experiences across a wider space of their customers. And so some utilities have established certain stakeholder engagement offices that can be engaged with and talked to about certain issues. But in the most case, unfortunately, largely utility to customer interactions are going to be kind of limited in scope, and really limited to like really focused initiatives versus larger scale change, which is really going to be made at the Public Utility Commission. But it's still a great option and also important to have a really good relationship with your utility company as all of these discussions are going forward. They are the lowest on the branch of these items, and so it's definitely important to really engage with them as well. So now we've kind of walked through some of the potential interveners. Let's talk about where some of these past inequities have been highlighted in the past, what other groundbreaking efforts have been quantified by researchers and experts across the space, and where things kind of be looking into the future. So, as I mentioned before, in the grid equity space, and rightfully so, disconnection rates have been the main focus area. Again, this is involuntary disconnections due to I forgot the exact word. I always forget the word, arbitrage or something like that. No, arbitrage, something like that. But the word for, unfortunately, when people cannot pay their bills over time, and then the utility has to shut off their power, and recognizing the disconnection rates and how they differ across community groups is extremely important for providing input to either legislative authorities on basically the funding or the amount of funding necessary to address those disconnections, or to incentivize or build out new rules to protect low-income customers from experiencing disconnections, especially when it comes to disconnections during certain weather events or certain times of season in which people are especially vulnerable to weather conditions. And so this is a case study. Minnesota and the amazing team led by Gabrielle Chan out of the University of Minnesota did has done significant work in this area, as have other entities, which we'll talk about in a second. But in this case, there was first and foremost, when I think about those framework components of grid equity, there was a very early effort by advocates in this space to push for better disconnection data. So not just disconnection rates as a single value, not just disconnection rates by utility metric, but disconnection rates with like geographic identifiers included. I think in this case it was census block groups, which would then allow researchers to better understand how these disconnection rates correlate to certain racial and socioeconomic demographics. And so in this case, after all that pre-work was done to really get better data and grid data transparency, they were then able to, again, investigate the data, understand it, and on the right, you see this annual disconnection rate by percent of people of color that increases as you go from left to right along the x-axis, and then also based on the the area median income, whether it's low income or very low income, or the average across a territory. And you can see this, there's just like an increase across both these metrics showing that as communities get blacker and as communities get poorer, that they're going to increase higher annual disconnection rates. And while that may kind of be in some cases, some people would be like, oh, that would be an obvious conclusion. This is an important conclusion because it allows for the focusing of policy efforts that target these exact percentages, these exact median income levels, and these exact geographical areas for intervention, for policy support mechanisms that can help people avoid being disconnected from the utility, from their from electricity, which is really important to their well-being. And so, yeah, by having that great data, by performing this assessment and making a more inclusive environment for participation and argumentation in front of the commissions, and then can now actually focus and yeah, hyper focus the incentives into the communities that need it most. So that's like kind of the progress, the stepwise process, the framework of how things like this get put into action. You can also see that there's been incredible work by Indiana University in the Energy Justice Lab, which has been monitoring disconnection rates across states, as well as the various protection language and laws that have been established to address certain disconnection issues. So whether it's, as we say here, this says that 9 states don't currently have cold weather protections, which is very concerning. There are other states that don't have hot weather protections, and a lot of this disconnection research was definitely spurred by the COVID pandemic, obviously due to the impact on consumer incomes and their inability then to pay utility bills after that. But it's really great to see nationwide efforts like this. And this is a really great resource. I highly recommend utilitydisconnections.org if you're concerned about things in your state and quantifying the experience of your customers, and checking then whether or not the language in your state has the types of protections that are identified by the Energy Justice Lab. But this is one of the most foremost grid transparency efforts that is now enabling a lot of advocates in the space to better target their efforts across the U.S. So highly commendable effort, and definitely something you should check out in the future. Again, I'll share these slides as well as a lot more resources as time goes. So beyond disconnection rates, we also have infrastructure quality, which has been a concern identified in a few different studies. There have been I only got marked one here. I think there's three or four major studies conducted on this space. The first major one was conducted in Michigan, investigating DTE Energy and their infrastructure investment practices. And what this is basically asking, when we think of infrastructure quality as a component of grid equity, it's whether or not the infrastructure that we have in our communities is maintained at the same levels as other communities. And therefore, is it going to be ultimately subject to, pretty intense and mass reliability issues as infrastructure gets older. So we want to make sure that any infrastructure well, first that we monitor the current state of infrastructure, and then the second part of the study is whether or not the replacement of that infrastructure with like for like is going to be successful in enabling those communities to receive all the benefits that the grid should really provide them at this point in time. We know the grid serves a lot of different things now. It's not just a couple lights in your home as it was 100 years ago. It is the source of your heating. It is a source of your cooking. It is a source of transportation in a lot of areas. And so we want to make sure that any new infrastructure does address all those capability requirements. And so in this example, Solidarity successfully argued that not only did infrastructure in DT Energy in DT Energy's territory in a certain area with Black and brown residents and vulnerable communities was significantly older than the system average, as well as much older than the industry life expectancy. Again, could result in major issues in the future. But it is also by replacing like for like, which in this case was 4.8 kV for 4.8 kV, you would not be allowing those customers to access all the benefits that a larger or more robust 13.2 kV system could provide, including increased load, again, electrification of transportation and cooking and heating and all those things, as well as clean energy access that comes with the increased capacity of a larger kV system compared to the 4.8. So that's, again, using that information. This was done in the discovery process, not necessarily publicly available information, but grid transparency was foundational to this research. Again, allows for more inclusive and knowledgeable argumentation, and then finally allows for prioritization and a change in the decision making that benefits certain communities. So incredible work by that team. Oh, I also mentioned also that there's been other work here in regards to um, age and infrastructure characteristics in, I think, Minnesota, Ohio, and I believe Maryland has done some early work here as well. But if anyone also knows of other content, I see there's stuff in the chat. I'll come back to that in a second because I'm almost done. We'll get questions in a sec. Finally, clean energy access, again, area near and dear to IREC's heart. And this is identifying when clean energy access, or like what do the current conditions of grid infrastructure in communities allow in terms of allowing customers of all types to adopt clean energy, hopefully resilient clean energy systems. And this is an assessment that actually I did, which found pretty stark differences in the capacity between disadvantaged communities and non-disadvantaged communities that could, over time, result in major interconnection barriers that need to be addressed. And this is what's, I think, really so interesting about thinking about the grid transparency component very early on in the process, is then you're able to perform a host of different solutions here. So solutions here can include improving grid infrastructure investments in those communities, increasing the capacity. That's one option. Two could be just simply creating an interconnection process that shares cost more equitably across systems. So people with high grid investments don't have to pay that much, and people with low have to pay a little bit more to compensate. Um, or it could include technical solutions like flexible interconnection or the like. So if you identify these issues early, it does provide a host of options for alleviating the issues into the future. And that's why we kind of think grid transparency is like so incredibly foundational to ensuring that grid equity can be enabled in the future. Um, Let me actually, before I go to look ahead, I do want to take a look at the chat real quick to see if there are any particular comments or notes. Think of critical thoughts. I know Minnesota requires zero shut off due to non-payments. Yep. Um, Implications. Perfect. Okay. Looks like there's maybe not direct questions to me just yet. But I will get to a couple of them. I think I can keep moving on for now. And in a few minutes, I'll switch over to questions fully, and we can highlight some. So looking ahead, what can we start doing today, and what should we be planning to do tomorrow? So first and foremost, I think the first thing we can do is really start building your capacity today. There are a lot of existing mechanisms to build your community's capacity to participate in these various proceedings, in knowledge building, and capacity building, and the like. So the first and foremost is intervenor compensation programs. So if you are a small community that currently lacks the financial resources to really take the next steps to, again, quantify the challenges that you're experiencing, or participate in interconnection with community developed projects, or participate in a regulatory hearing because you lack the legal counsel, the money for a legal counsel to participate. There are various intervenor compensation opportunities, and I do have a link in the presentation to a report on this, but IREC is currently working, and I think there's another organization actually working on a wider spread effort to provide a greater overlook of the national landscape of intervenor compensation. So that should be more easily accessible very, very soon. So that's number one. Review and whether or not there are compensation mechanisms available that you can apply for. Two is join an existing coalition that is already geared towards elevating community voices. I'll obviously plug IREC here, but we have Vote Solar, who's done a lot of work here. Public Power is really focused on increasing energy democracy. Sierra Club, Power Lines, Energy Democracy Project, and many, many others. I know a few others of you are on the call here, so please again share your information in the chat if you want others to reach out to you. Then we have expanding your knowledge of the space. This is going to be recognizing that there are certain capacity or technical capacity barriers across even the existing coalitions. We just don't have the resources often to support everywhere. And so a lot of us, or a lot of organizations, are really focusing on helping build up capacity in local organizations. So if you are interested in expanding your organization's technical expertise and legal capacity in this space, please reach out to me. I can link you with other organizations as well as some upcoming efforts by IREC to dive really, really deep into all these tools and components in the future. And finally, you want to start building your case quantitatively. There are, as I mentioned, a few of the research efforts. There are probably like 10 or so more from national labs. I know a lot of that has changed recently, but there are experts there who would be interested at least sharing their experience with you. People's Energy Analytics, Desi Naka, CMU's organization focusing on energy burden assessment, University of Minnesota, University of Indiana, again, that is the Energy Justice Lab, as well as the great reliability and grid regression analysis work from Gabriel Chan, and several more. Again, please feel to reach out to myself and others on the call to help support you in those efforts, help building that quantitative case that you can actually take to regulators. And that is it. So I do have to include the donate. I know I expect you all to donate, but the donate now slide to IREC. But I do also want to share that we do have a newsletter and our website, which will be updated soon with a lot of additional grid equity resources, including a lot of new educational materials. But with that, I do want to open it up to questions, and I would love if you came off camera and said hi and went and shared your thoughts on where we can move forward, what grid equity actions you see, and what support mechanisms you kind of hope to maybe share if you're one of those advocates.
I saw Madeline left a question in the chat. In your clean energy access study in Ohio, is this mostly residential scale interconnection capacity?
Absolutely. Yep. Thanks so much, Madeline. That was residential interconnection capacity. It was based on distribution circuit amperage. So yeah, we didn't have host capacity. Ohio's only just building out host capacity maps. And so hopefully when that comes, we'll be able to get more detail there. But yeah, this was a more limited scope, just really focused on what is the current uh, um, ampacity of distribution circuits across different territories. Um, and how to do the study, yeah, without host capacity maps yet. Yep, and that was done with again the ampacity value. Dan?
Yeah, sorry, give me one second. I actually wrote out what I was gonna say, so I make it but I actually work for the Michigan Public Service Commission, and I'm really glad that you spoke to the point of advocacy. I just wanted to say like advocacy is extremely important. Here in Michigan, for example, while participation in our cases are extremely welcome by our commission, it's much easier for an advocacy group to participate in an open case before our commission than it is for an individual. And then also, due process is legally required within each contested case. And I don't even think that varies by state. I think that's pretty much across the board. So in Michigan, while individual comments can be unofficially added to dockets, unless testimony is provided unless testimony is provided, an opinion or perspective can't be added to the actual record of the case. And that is what the commissioners and their staff actually get to review. So typically this is provided by advocacy groups, legal representation, which for Michigan includes the state attorney general, and I know that's the case in other states as well. But also specialists who work with the advocacy groups or legal representation. So I just wanted to, from someone who works, in a commission, I wanted to point out that advocacy is extremely important in order for us to weigh the importance of, the movement, input from interveners.
Absolutely. Yeah. As Samani said, yeah, thank you so much for clarifying that difference. It's really, really important. And also, while recognized in its importance, legal counsel, in order to making sure the argumentations are robust and yeah, are robust and legally, I guess, admissible, it is expensive, right? And so that's why advocacy groups that actually have those support mechanisms or have those linkages to different legal counsel or representation at a lower cost is really, really helpful. So definitely getting involved and joining one of those coalitions I mentioned, and as well as some that are mentioned in the chat, is going to be really, really helpful for long-term and robust change. Any other questions? Maybe I'll look through the chat real quick.
I want to raise a question here, since no one else is, since we have you and no one else is saying anything as of yet. For community groups like Solidarity, We Want Green Too also intervenes alongside Solidarity that apply for funding. Our intervener compensation comes from the UCPB, the Utility Consumer Participation Board. And we've recognized that we have gotten sort of drowned out by other larger organizations that also apply for that funding. And so it's become more complicated to be involved in that process. And actually, in this year's rate case, we weren't funded because we didn't apply as early as larger groups that were a part of it. And so I just wonder we're still trying to intervene, but we won't have the expert witnesses that we usually have that we've had for the past few cases that made such a critical difference. And so how do folks combat that? Or how do you see us being able to still participate in a meaningful way and do what Dan has said, bringing those critical voices and making those critical arguments without that support.
I wish I had an answer, Amani. That is a great point. Yeah, I'm curious if other people have some thoughts here, but if I'm reading it correctly, the limited intervener support that is provided or mechanisms that are provided are insufficient for the amount of interveners that are really necessary or required by certain community groups. That's correct, right? Um, I'm really curious. I'm forgetting what actual entity is doing it. Is it maybe Grid Metal? Isn't it Grid Lab? I don't remember. But so one organization is currently doing a larger intervenor compensation examination across the U.S. And I think they're going to uncover maybe a lot of those issues. And if I find it, Amani, I'm maybe if you're unfamiliar with that initiative, I'll make sure I find it on LinkedIn and send it over to you because I think they'd love to hear that opinion and thought because I think there needs to be some definite some reforms into how those programs are funded and I think there's a lot of creative ways through interconnection or other rider programs in which these can be really easily funded. It's just right now it's definitely a side note compared to what could be like built in structurally.
I'll add that this year there was significantly less funding than there was last year provided to the UCPB. So that made a difference as well. So people were starting to apply earlier, and we didn't have the bandwidth to apply as earlier as other folks. So it's kind of like first come, first serve. Thank you for that, for speaking of that and that resource being provided as well.
Yeah, and Shay, I work at Grid Lab. Great to meet you all. I'm a college friend of Shay's. Um, and I don't know about providing compensation for advocates, but I will say Grid Lab, my organization, does provide technical, like pro bono consulting for advocates, primarily in from an environmental perspective, but it's all related, and I think we can all agree that um, clean energy is the way to get to affordability and a lot of other issues that we have on the grid. So I provided my information in the chat. Happy to support or direct people to support if that's relevant.
Thank you, Madeline. I'll certainly be reaching out. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, it looks like there are no other questions. I just want to again thank you all. Thanks, Scene, and thank Elevated Engagement for having me here. Again, I will note that IREC is working on all like much more technically rigorous and deep kind of interconnection and grid integration and grid planning related trainings. So please check out our newsletter for more information on that. We'll be reaching out to, I think a few of you already know about the trainings, but please reach out and we'd love to invite you all to help us build out those tools to help enable communities better access, regulatory engagement proceedings from a technical and procedural limitation standpoint. So it was really wonderful to be here with you all, and so good to see all these amazing faces, all these good friends of mine. And yeah, I'll pass it back to Amani.